Welcome back to Wendy Unfiltered, which I co-host with Wendy Yuan. This episode is called The Pivot That Paid Off. My name is Charlie Smith, and I've been a Canadian journalist for more than 30 years. My co-host, Wendy, is a successful entrepreneur, community leader, and former federal and provincial political candidate. She came to Canada from China more than 40 years ago on a CETA scholarship. At the time, she had just $50 in her pocket. Today, we're going to discuss how Wendy and her husband, Can, pivoted their business in a dramatic way. So nice to be back with you, Wendy.
I'm really looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, me as well. In the last one, just to catch listeners up to what was going on, we talked about how you and your husband, Can, had built up a computer business in Montreal, but then there was a severe economic downturn in the early 1990s in Canada. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interesting that you mentioned the downturn. Absolutely knew by then that we had to diversify. We had to let people go from the computer side of the business. So Ken decided to go to Macau, Hong Kong, and Thailand, where he had relatives and business contacts. And I went to China to attend this Canton Fair in Guangdong province. And that was 1992. Yeah.
The Canton Fair.
Yeah.
What? Please tell me more.
A lot of people actually know about this Canton Fair. For those of you who are not familiar with what it is in Guangdong province, and it is one of the biggest international business fairs in the country. You go there to find trading opportunities. It actually attracts a lot of people from all over the world. There are all kinds of products for import and export.
Well, with the import and export, I'm guessing you were thinking about selling products in Montreal. So
yes.
What types of products were you looking at sourcing?
I sourced silk, for instance, which I resold in Montreal. I also bought stainless steel knives that I resold in Montreal. Also machineries, paintings, and folding picnic tables, you name it. Basically, any products that would make us some money, because China was booming. There were lots of infrastructure projects like railroads, highways, hospitals were being built everywhere and every day. China needed lots of steel back then.
Steel?
Oh yeah, steel products. I had a former student from Guangzhou whom I got reconnected while I was attending the Canton Fair in Guangzhou province, whose company needed to buy lots of steel, he was telling me. Wow. So basically his company had the capacity to issue letter of credit at site with great credit history in the steel industry and also with the banks. But, he needed to source a solid overseas supplier who could supply deformed bars and wire rods on a long-term basis, because the quality of these two steel products that were manufactured in China back then was not really up to the bar. Yeah.
That sounds so exciting.
Yeah.
So it's very good when you already have a buyer, opportunities knocking.
Yeah.
Where were you able to find a supplier?
Yeah, you know what? In those days, there was no internet, mind you, right? I used product catalogs and remember white page, yellow page, whatever I could get hold of, right? To find steel suppliers around the globe. I remember faxing inquiries to many, many companies, but I didn't hear anything back from them for quite a while. But one day, I received a fax from a large, reputable steel supplier in Europe. They said that their chairman was leading a delegation of 4 to Beijing in a week's time, and they were coming to expand their steel business in China. So the fax listed the hotel where they would be staying. I thought, wow, that's great.
There's only one problem. You're in Montreal.
Yes.
You have to get to Beijing.
I know.
So what did you do?
Actually, there were some complications. At that time, there was actually another thing. My mom one day called. She was crying on the other side of the phone. I was like, Mom, what's wrong? She said, your dad was just diagnosed with terminal cancer stage 4. The doctor told him he only had 4 months to live.
Oh my gosh, that sounds terrible, Wendy.
Oh, I'm telling you, Charlie, even now thinking back, that was 30 years ago. It was the hardest and darkest time of my life. My dad and I were very, very close. I just couldn't handle this news because you know what? Also, just a few months earlier, he was a happy and healthy person. He was a visiting scholar in University of Victoria. I was taking him everywhere and he was happy and everything. I just couldn't believe that all of a sudden he had only 4 months to live. And now he is in a Beijing hospital. It's just so unbelievable.
Wow, that's really tough. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I just jumped on the plane and rushed to Beijing. I got to Beijing. I'm telling you, that's so sad. My dad looked like a different person. His skin was yellow. They call it jaundice.
Yeah, jaundice.
Jaundice. Oh, I remember. I was so sad. I cried. Yeah. I spent every night in that hospital with my dad for months. He only had 4 months to live, right? So I wanted to seize every day that I had with my dad. I remember I would be in a chair and I would doze off in my clothes where, my clothes was still on, right? Because there was no bed for me. And during the day, I would try to arrange business meetings and to find opportunities. So every day I felt I was like a walking zombie. It was really tough.
Wow, this is like you're sleeping in a chair in a hospital. You're going out to meet executives during the day or hoping to. Where did things go with the European Steel Company?
Oh, yeah, it was really tough. So, the hotel staff wouldn't put my call through because I didn't know the delegation's room number or the chairman's room number. I remember calling, they wouldn't just put me through. They said, sorry, if you don't have the room number, we can't help you. That was the rule in China. If you don't have the room number of the hotel, of the person who is staying with the hotel that you're looking for, they just wouldn't be able to help you. So I ended up faxing again to the company asking for the room number. But the secretary said, sorry, we just know the hotel name.
Wow.
So then at that time, there was no email or internet, right, in those days. So I ended up going to the hotel for several days in a row, just looking for a delegation of 4 guys from Europe.
Wow. So you're spending nights at the hospital, days in the hotel, looking for people who are speaking a European language. And so how did that go?
Yeah, no, I tell you, I kept seeing guys in business suits, right? I remember I would hold up the fax and ask if they were from that company, and they kept saying no. So I had lots of no's. And you know what? I had lots of anxieties, not knowing when the delegation was leaving Beijing, right? I just knew they came. But one morning I left the hospital very early, around 7:00 a.m. And so I remember it was pouring, but I went straight to the hotel. And you know what? And when I got to the hotel, very soon I saw the elevator opening up and I saw this 4 men coming out of that elevator. And they looked like European to me.
Wearing suits?
Yeah, they were wearing suits and ties and, and I went up and I asked, hey, any of you is Mr. Onay? Because that's the chairman's name, right?
And what did they say?
And so there's this one guy who said, it's me. I'm Mr. Onay. What do you want, right? And I said, look, I faxed this inquiry and your company said you are going to be in Beijing and I was hoping to have a chance to speak to you so that I can explain my inquiry to you so that we can start doing business because I want to buy steel from you. But he said, I'm so sorry. We're in a rush. We have to go. And he said, why don't you maybe send a fax to the hotel explaining what you wanted to say. And so he gave me the room number. He said, put the room number on the fax and just fax it to the front desk. And I'll take a look and see whether I can get back to you. But please don't call.
Sounds
just
like
fax.
a little bit of a brush off.
Yeah.
Wendy.
No, I was, yeah.
After all that work, and then all you can do is send another fax.
I know. So I had no choice. So I faxed. But at least this time I had the room number, right? No response. After maybe a week, at least, no response. So I called the hotel just to make sure that he got the fax. And they said, yeah, he took the fax. And one day I went home, my parents' home, seeing a fax sitting there. I was like, oh, I hope it was from him. And sure enough, it was from Mr. One. And in the fax, and he was saying, well, I have 15 minutes for coffee if you want to come the next day. Oh, you know what? I thought, oh, at least I'm getting somewhere. So, Charlie, I got there 30 minutes earlier.
Good for you.
And I know. And we sat down, but the conversation was tough. I remember he asked me, have you ever done steel business? I said, no. Do you know what deformed bars and wire rods look like? I said, no. And he said, do you understand any of the specifications listed on your inquiry? I said, no.
This is not going well.
No, I was like, oh my God, does he have to ask all that questions to make me embarrassed, right? And then he asked, well, have you ever done any business? I said, of course. I'm the president of Bradley Pacific. My company has been in computer business for the last 3 years, and we were doing very well the first 2 years and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I also graduated from the top business university in Beijing, and that is called UIBE. And you know what? He had his vice president with him, at the coffee meeting. And that guy actually, for some reason, he knew about UIBE. He said, oh, you're from that university. I know about that university, that a lot of the top business people from China actually graduated from that university. I said, absolutely. I said, you should have some confidence in me, And the chairman said, well, have you actually opened a letter of credit before? I said, no, but I know how to do it theoretically because I studied business and I also taught business English, And the chairman, he looked at me, he said, okay, what about us meeting with your client directly? Can you bring your client to Beijing? He said his company has always, dealt with only companies in the industry and never dealt with people like me who just made a cold call.
Well, you know what this sounds like to me, Wendy, is he's maybe cutting you out of a commission and wanting to deal directly with your customer that you had found and were prepared to deliver to him.
I know. I thought, oh, this guy is a shark, right? So I told him, I said, hey, you want to meet with my supplier without me? So how am I going to get paid, right?
Good question.
I said, are you going to cut me out of the deal? I said, I wouldn't let that happen. I said, look, why? He said, well, because you had no experience, right? And in order for this transaction to be successful, this is about the only thing we could do. I said, okay, I don't mind you do this, but there's a big but. You need to make me the sole exclusive agent and sign an agreement. If that happens, I can bring him to Beijing and you can meet with him, and preferably with me being there too,
Well, that was smart.
I'm a businesswoman. He said, okay, let me think about it and we'll get back to you. And I was like, okay. So I went back home, and maybe a few days later, because they were in a rush to leave already, he called. Actually, he faxed again. He said, we're going to be signing an agreement with you, so exclusive agent. But you do need to bring your client to Beijing before we leave. And it has to be happening within 2 days. That's when I called my former student, who's also my client in this case, right? So I said, hey, can you hop on the plane tonight? Because I need you to be here to meet with the supplier so we can sign the deal. I can sign the deal with him to be the sole exclusive agent, and then we can start doing business. So he hopped on the plane, he got here. And the next day, we went to see Mr. One. That agreement was signed. I was in red, right? So that was good luck. And I was so happy and was like, oh my God, finally it happened. After all this, after everything I had to go through.
And the shipments went through and everything else?
Oh yeah, the shipment kept coming in the next year, and the letter of credit was very, very smooth. And I was the happiest woman. But my dad sadly passed away.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had this wonderful thing happening in business, but this tragedy in the family.
Yeah. Lucky Ken was able to visit my dad before we lost him. You know what? I had a big, big hole in my heart when I lost my dad. Even though the business happened, but nothing can replace my dad, right? It just, it happened while this new chapter began, which is good. But, I was really, really sad. In this case, nothing could replace my dad.
And meanwhile, your son, Sonny, where is he when all of this is happening?
When all this was happening to me, Charlie, Sonny stayed with Ken's mom, my mother-in-law, in Montreal for a lot of the time. So we were separated as a family for extended periods, which was pretty difficult. My secretary would be the one who would drop Sonny off every day to the daycare and then pick Sonny up, at the end of the day to send Sonny back to the grandma. And Ken was, of course, in Thailand, and he was traveling between Thailand, Hong Kong, and Macau, still trying to look for opportunities, right? So, Charlie, I almost didn't make it with all these difficulties around me.
That's
3 members of the family, right, were separated for a long time.
Yeah. What a challenge. It makes me wonder sometimes when we go through major challenges in our lives, which come up at certain periods, we can also take strength from it. And I'm wondering what lessons you might have learned from this.
I'm a Buddhist, and the whole time I believed that Buddha had a plan for me. So when something so terrible like this happens, in this case, the loss of my dad, something good was bound to happen. I'll never really get over the loss of my dad, but it occurred just as a new door was opening in the steel business. Business thereafter was unstoppable.
I'd like to explore more on the business and the human side of business. But for now, do you have any closing remarks?
Always have faith in what you do. Be honest and be persistent. Eventually, you will earn people's trust. And eventually, you will succeed and you will be awarded. There are sharks, for sure, in business. But there are also a lot of good people. So put your faith in there.
Well, that's a heartwarming message to close. Thank you very much. And thanks to anyone watching for tuning in to another episode of Wendy Unfiltered. I'm Charlie Smith, and my co-host is Wendy Yuan. If you like what you see on Wendy Unfiltered, subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends. You can also follow this podcast on social media channels listed below. I hope you can join us for our next bi-weekly episode. That's when Wendy will talk more about her business career and her initial involvement in politics. Until then, take care.